Jamie, what's going on, brother? Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Seth. This is awesome. I'm excited to be here, and I'm hoping to add some value.
Absolutely, man. Third time's a charm. We've been trying to get this scheduled after I was on your show, which was fantastic. I had a really good time on that show, and I think it turned out pretty good. So I know we're gonna
Absolutely.
we're gonna deliver on this one as well.
Yeah, we're gonna try to. I'll try to do as good a job as you did. So yeah,
I don't know about that.
yeah, no, I that was a very very good episode, from adversity to abundance. I would highly recommend your listeners check that one out too. Your episode on that show. So thanks for doing that.
Absolutely, man. You're an incredible interviewer. That's the only I've been on dozens of podcasts, and you pulled out a lot of things for me that I've never talked about on the air. So it's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome show, man.
Appreciate that.
Cool, man. Well, let's just jump right into your background, man. What's your story? Take it back as far as you'd like to, brother.
Yeah. Man, I'd like to think that life has phases. So I've had a few different phases in my life. I come from a large family. I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and we always had a competitive background as far as team sports and things like that. So I played lacrosse in college. That was always a foundational piece of my life, and just kind of, I think from there, learned how to be a part of something bigger than myself and how to work toward a common goal with a team. So that's been something that's been a kind of a thread through my life. And then got married and joined the military, and I actually joined the military technically before I got married, but seemed like I got married and then ran off and ran away from my wife, but it's not exactly what happened. But joined the military, was an officer in the U.S. Army. I did miss my first 3 wedding anniversaries through deployment and things like that. And again, it was a matter of trying to be plugged into something, to serve and be a part of something bigger than myself, and trying to add value, like I think we all want to do. I've obviously glossed over a lot of details, but those were a couple of inflection points, I guess, if you will, like you like to talk about, I know. And so my military career transitioned into a career with the Department of Defense as a civilian, and did 14 years as a civilian with DoD at Fort Meade. And the first half, so the first 7, for all you math whizzes out there, was full-time. And then the second half, the second 7 years, was part-time. And that 7 years is when I was really building my businesses, which are largely real estate investing and mortgage note investing focused. So we can get into the details there. And then in 2022, I ended up quitting my job, and now I have a few different small businesses that I run. And like you, Seth, I've got a lot of different things that I'm juggling, and but yeah, I love talking about taking ownership of your financial situation and taking ownership of your life, really. And I know that you and I have that in common. So yeah, that's a high level overview of my background.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that. There's a lot to unpack there. Going back to, playing sports all the way up to the collegiate level, that's incredible. I always like to think, even playing like Pop Warner football back in the
Yeah.
day, you need a way to instill discipline in yourself. And I that's kind of the oldest memory I can think of, where it was hard, right? Like, it was like you've got a coach screaming at you. Like,
Yeah.
back in the day, it's like, they wouldn't give you water unless you were like, for like an
Yeah.
hour, which I don't think they do that anymore now. But, you had
Right.
to earn that drink of water and all those sorts of things. But you really learned what it's like to work hard, and you really learned what discipline was all about. And I would say that, and you can expand on this, but
Yeah.
I would say that, being in the military yourself, that
Yeah.
takes it to a whole new level, right? It's like you got
Yeah.
that from sports, you got that from the military.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously they're very different in a lot of ways, but that is certainly a common theme, is being disciplined. And people shy away from that word because it just sounds like work or no fun and no flexibility. But I found that having discipline in your life ends up adding more freedom, in a sense, because you kind of have your foundational pieces set in stone. You don't have to think about those. And so, regarding team sports, it's really a matter of, everyone doing their part, right? And so there's a level of individual discipline, and then also just kind of putting the group ahead of yourself. Obviously you want individual, there's nothing wrong with individual accolades. And I was certainly chasing, those individual accolades. It's not something I shied away from. I definitely was wrapped up in trying to be an All-American and that kind of thing. And did get that a couple of times, but at the end of the day, nobody really cares about that. And the way I viewed it was, if I was doing my part and I got those, if I was scoring goals in lacrosse, as an example, that means I'm contributing to, to the team, right? And so there's obviously a fine line there, but of going too far either way. But yeah, that discipline is critical. Even I played at a high level in college, and there was year round, you're training, you're into it. It was a Division III school, but the reality was we worked just as hard as any D1 program. And these are skills that have paid off and are absolutely transferable to the rest of life.
For sure. Yeah, I think you've got to get those intangible things. You've got to develop them somewhere along the way. Whatever that is, if that's sports or the military, or from your parents. I mean, you can get it from different places, but you definitely need it. I mean, we're in different stages of our life at this point. We're talking about a lot. We like talk about freedom and flexibility and fun, to try to get away from kind of the W-2 mindset. But in order to achieve freedom, flexibility, and fun in a successful way, you have to be disciplined to be able to get there. You had to have done something successfully to be able to get there. Or maybe what separates you from, the guy living in a van down by the river, right? Like that guy has freedom and flexibility. I don't know about fun, maybe fun, but but it's a different, obviously it's a different outcome.
Yeah. And I think I still need, I still use a lot of discipline today. It's still required, but I guess it's self-imposed. And, I just love having that flexibility and that freedom, that comes along with being an entrepreneur. So yeah, it's been a central piece to my success for sure. But I don't think it ever, goes away. I just get to pick and choose what discipline I want to kind of enforce on myself, I guess. So yeah, absolutely. And as you said, the military was a huge part of that for me as well. I mean, that's a different kind of discipline and different kind of teamwork, and different, if you lose a lacrosse game, okay, you lost the lacrosse game, but in military, the stakes are a little higher. So maybe certain things are more important. Attention to detail is critical. And, but at the end of the day, it's the same principles apply across both, I guess, sectors, if you will.
For sure. So let's dive into that transition. You started working kind of part-time there for 7 years. So that seems like a transitional period. How were you able to progress from, that W-2, and what I've heard you say is call yourself a W-2 quitter. And I love that. How were you able to progress from a W-2 person to a W-2 quitter? What enabled you to do that, and what did that transition look like?
I mean, I do remember in 2015, probably a little bit, maybe say 2014, but I had a wife and 2 kids, and I had the long commute that I know a lot of people can identify with. So, it just was Groundhog Day. It was the same thing over and over and over. And that's not me sitting here complaining about my family or having the opportunity to work. But after a while, it gets old. Let's just be real, right? So it's like you're sitting in traffic, and you start looking at, I worked for the government, and you look around and you say, who's sort of ahead of me on this? I think you probably mentioned on your show, on my show, your episode, you look around to the people who are more kind of further along the path than you. You say, do you want to be that person? Is that the life you want? And man, I did not want that. And it just having that just super long term, just the pot at the end of the rainbow, I guess, nothing driving me in the interim. Man, it was brutal. So I probably did a little woe is me for a little bit there, a little victim mentality for a bit, but then you start to realize, like, okay, if you don't take ownership of your own life, no one's going to, right? So no one's going to come in and do this for you. So I'm not sure what truly, created the change in my mindset, but my mindset absolutely started to change, and I just made a shift, and I stopped watching cable news. I stopped just stop paying attention to all the things that I can't control and I couldn't control back then, and started saying, no, what do I have? What are my strengths? Who's back to the team thing? Who's on my team? Who's in my network that I can add value to, and who can add value to me? So I started looking around, and my father was a realtor for many years. My brother was a loan officer. We had one rental property at the time. And I had worked I didn't mention, I worked at a title company, and I worked for a mortgage broker before as well, briefly. So I had this experience that a lot of people don't have. And that's, that doesn't mean I'm better than anyone. It just means these are my strengths. So let's point to that and let's use that. So I started really being intentional about focusing on my strengths and my assets that I had in my life, right? And then another asset that I used to see as a liability was the time in the car. So I started listening to podcasts. Oh, and then it turned into, wait, I don't even want to go into work yet because this podcast episode is amazing and I'm learning so much, Bigger Pockets and all the other real estate podcasts and different investing podcasts, and started using that mental bandwidth instead of focusing on national media stories that I have zero influence over. Here's something that I can actually take action on. And so in mid 2015, I went part-time, and it just so happens that at DOD, it's one of the few agencies in the federal government where you can go part-time and still keep your benefits. So I still had health insurance for my family. Most people don't have that option necessarily, but oh well, I did. So that's what I did. And that's again, decided to start building my other streams of income outside of my W-2. Had my circumstances been different, if I was single, I probably would have just quit the whole thing, right? But I was able to have that kind of laddered approach, I guess, or tiered approach to kind of ripping off the Band-Aid.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I love just the idea of taking ownership of your life, right? Like everybody has those moments where they're feeling sorry for themselves. But the successful people, they don't sit there and stay in that mindset. They move on. You're going to be there sometimes where you've got to get out of it. And you got to say, okay, what can I control? What can I change? And you don't give other people the power to control you and your mindset and how you feel about your life, right? Like that's the thing. Like if you're constantly blaming someone else or saying this happened to me rather than what can I do to get myself out of it, then you're going to be stuck there forever. You're going to be spinning your wheels forever. And a lot of that I think helps because you said you don't watch the news. I don't either.
No.
It's a waste of time. What does that do for us? If I do watch it, I literally do it for entertainment, and you look at it as an entertainment. I look at it like I'm watching sports almost.
Absolutely.
Now, I look at it like this is funny. Like I can, know what I mean? You kind of analyze it like, oh, this is funny. This guy's saying this in a debate versus this guy's saying that. It's not taking it as fact and news, and this is how I should live my life because of what they're saying.
Absolutely. And it's not to say that none of these topics are, important, right? I mean, global, war, or politics, poverty, global warming, whatever, that's all very important, but I have zero control over it, almost zero, right? And then, the other thing is fear sells, and that's what they're selling. And so it doesn't mean that every story is invented and it's all fake news, but it just doesn't serve me. And so I'd rather focus on, go ground up and kind of, just, I see it in people, maybe older people in my own life now who maybe are retired and they watch the news all day, and it's like, they won't travel because they saw a news story that the airports are packed or something. And it's,
Yeah.
I'm sure that story was accurate, right? But the news can filter out, and you end up only focusing on the negative, really. And it just didn't serve me. So yeah, during the second 7 years, I was able to build out. My wife and I were doing single family real estate investing and doing a lot of the Burr method that maybe some of your audience is familiar with. And so kind of putting that capital back into the rental property machine and expanding our portfolio. And then eventually last year, well, in 2018, I made the pivot. I kept the rental properties, but made a pivot to also add on mortgage note investing. And that's been my primary focus as of late. And if you want, I can tell the story quickly about how I actually quit my job in 2022. I think it's kind of a funny one.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. So I 2 years ago, I was playing badminton, and I'd been doing, now, mind you, I used to be like tough, athlete, and like I did, did jujitsu for 3 years right up before this, and used to lift weights a lot, and still do it here and there. But I think I'm tough, right? And I ruptured my Achilles playing badminton. So that's an ego blow to add on to the physical pain that, especially with the recovery. So I ruptured my Achilles a little over 2 years ago today. And I was out of work. It was my right foot. And the reason I bring this up is not for sympathy, but to say, I couldn't drive for 3 months. So I actually, and I had tons of leave from work. And by this time I was tired, really tired of I was pretty much checked out. Like I think you might have been at your big law job, but
That's right.
I was checked out. I mean, I wasn't the best employee at this point, and so I took as much leave as I could, reasonably, right? And so, but couldn't drive, and so I was out for 3 months, and I come back into work, and I'd had discussions with my wife about leaving. It was just a matter of when, not if. I can tell you truthfully, I had no idea that I was going to quit this day, but I came back in from having been out for 3 months. Mind you, no one gave me a call. No one from work, no one from my management gave me a call the entire 3 months I was out, other than to ask me, are you vaccinated? Because you have to be vaccinated to get inside the building. Now, I don't want this to turn into some controversial vaccine discussion or get your podcast banned from something. But yes, I'd been vaccinated, to answer the question, but no one asked me, how's your recovery going? Like, what are you, how's your life? It's just, are you vaccinated? You need to get that shot before you come in. Okay, great. Thanks. I really feel welcome here. So I'm already just, you know what, screw this place. Right. Come back in and just go to my desk. And this is an office space kind of thing where I go to my desk and there's an Air Force kid at my desk. And long story short, they kind of moved me somewhere else without telling me. I can't find my desk. I finally find it. It's got a box with my name on it with, monitors sideways and all, and clearly not a functioning desk and, office space. So I literally quit that day. And I just say that it's just like, I knew 100% I was done. My wife didn't know I quit, but I quit that day, still worked for another month or two, but there was no question, zero question in my mind. I'm done with this place. So that was March of 2022. And ever since then, I've just focused on building out my businesses and haven't looked back.
That's awesome. Sometimes you just know, right? Like sometimes it's time. You just knew. I love that story, man. For me, it was a little bit, you already know the story, but for me, it was a little bit more of someone else's decision. I got fired. I mean, and you'd mentioned that, you weren't the best employee at that point.
Correct.
I knew the same thing. And it's great to have awareness and perspective, and kind of looking back now, you're like, I would have done the same thing. Like, this guy doesn't want to be here. His output isn't what it should be. Like,
Nope.
he's got to go. I mean,
Yeah.
he's not the best employee. And as a, as a business owner now, I can, I have really good perspective of that and seeing
Hmm.
that. And
Yeah.
they were doing me a favor by being like, hey, like, your heart's not in it, is it? And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not.
Yeah. Yeah. The reality is for me, it's really hard to work, once you go part-time. I mean, I knew I was casting a vote against my career progression there. So as soon as I went part-time in 2015, I wasn't saying, I'm in this for the long haul, guys. This is my focus. It's the writing's somewhat on the wall. Looking back, it's almost surprising I lasted as long as I did.
Right.
But so yeah, haven't looked back and just love the entrepreneurial, day to day and freedom that you alluded to, and just the multiple streams of income, and certainly has its challenges. I probably work harder now than I ever have. But it's by choice.
Right.
So I love it.
Exactly. Same here, man. I mean, it's, my days are long. I mean, I get
Yeah.
up way before I used to get up when I had a 9 to 5. I work
Yeah.
past when I would have worked a 9 to 5, and it's definitely more hours. But when you're doing it for yourself and you're doing it because you're working towards something that you believe
Hmm.
in,
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like you're putting that much time in.
definitely. I wake up early a lot of days, not on purpose, is because I'm just excited to get cracking. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, well, let's kind of get into your current business. I know you
Yeah.
had mentioned that you focused on your strengths and your assets.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. I'll just say it's important to take an inventory of what your strengths are when you're kind of considering going into something else. Because a lot of our listeners are attorneys, they're doctors, folks like
Hmm.
that. They kind of feel like maybe they're pigeonholed, right? Like, well, if I'm
Hmm.
not an attorney, what the hell else can I do? Right. And
Hmm.
like, I don't know anything about real estate investing or note investing or starting a
Yeah.
business or anything like that. But if you really take a step back, you probably have a lot of skills that you've learned and honed in your career that you can use for something else moving forward. And that's what you were able to do.
Definitely. And one thing I'd say is that, one thing that's always comforting for me is nobody knows everything, right? So you can always find somebody who knows more than you in a certain area. Um, there's one quote about every man is my superior in something, right? So basically, it gives me a lot of comfort to know, like, just because an attorney listening to your show knows a way more than I do about a particular topic, and probably many, many other topics, that doesn't mean I'm less of a person, or, I don't know more than that attorney does in another area. So it's okay. I'm never going to know everything. And there are other people who've already figured it out. So, um, that's always comforting to me, and when I say look to your strengths, it's also looking to the people in your network who know or can help you get to where you want to go. So yeah, I mean, so many things we take for granted that we do know. And example, when I started working at a title company fresh out of college, because it was my first real job and it paid, a salary. Um, I realized quickly how little I knew about title insurance, settlements, just basic stuff. Now looking back, pretty basic stuff, but you don't know that unless you work for a title company or you're heavily
Yeah.
involved in this. You're not trained in that in school typically, right? So, you forget. And so your listener out there, the attorney, the doctor, I guarantee they have a lot of life experience, not just from their professional world, but just life experience that they shouldn't take for granted. And the fact that you can go through law school and then be an effective attorney, or go through medical school and be an effective doctor, that means you can learn things, right? And so again, I'll go back to life has seasons. I mean, you've shown that in your own story, Seth. Like, you know, um, it doesn't mean just because I started a certain business doesn't mean that's going to be what I'm going to be doing for the next 20 years. Or just because I'm an attorney now, it doesn't mean that's what I have to do for the rest of my life. So we always have options. I mean, you might look back and wish you'd done something differently or something, but you only have one chance at this. And so, you just make the most of it, and just keep learning constantly, is critical. I just hired a business coach. We've had one call. But one of his mottos is, one of his sayings is that he's in permanent beta. So he's always changing, always improving. He's always growing. So I'm trying to implement that as well.
Yeah, no, I love that permanent beta. I haven't heard that before, but I like that. I like that phrase. I like that phrase. So tell me about your current business. Tell me about mortgage note investing. Start with the basics.
Sure.
What is it?
Yeah. So, and I'll try to keep it, there's so much to it, but again, none of it is difficult. It's just a lot of moving parts, and you've got to, it takes time to learn. We buy debt. So we buy a mortgage note, and that could be performing or non-performing. The real high level version is a performing note is kind of like a long-term buy and hold rental property, but you're buying the debt and becoming the lender, becoming the bank, if you will. And so you're buying that performing note for cash flow. So I buy a performing note. The borrower now pays me through a loan servicer, and I get monthly payments. So that's a great way to go. The problem with that is you can't really add value to that asset very well. You're kind of, it is what it is. And in fact, with mortgage notes, the value actually goes down over time, generally speaking, because the principal balance goes down. So it's worth less than it was when you bought it. Then on the other side, the non-performing side of things, we buy those as well. And those are more like a fix and flip property. So although we're still buying the debt, we're not buying the property, but there's a chance to add value. There's an opportunity to buy a distressed asset and add value to that asset, and then sell that non-performing note. I should say sell that asset, whether that's as a reperforming note or as through the real estate itself. There are a few different ways you can exit a non-performing note deal. But back to your kind of one of the themes thus far, one of the reasons I got into specifically that space was that I understood the real estate space. So I understood the single family residential real estate space. So it wasn't a huge leap for me to go from owning the property to now owning the debt on that property. Whereas it would have been a lot bigger leap for me to say, oh, I want to start buying distressed, multifamily debt, which I know you could probably help me understand better. But it's like incremental progress and change isn't that scary. So I kind of expanded my toolbox, if you will, and got into the mortgage note space. So we have a couple of note funds. One is open currently, and they're all for accredited investors. And the income fund that's open pays a monthly, aims to pay a monthly preferred return. I know you and a lot of your listeners are attorneys, so I got to hold the line here. And so the fund is structured to aim to pay a monthly return of 8%. There's no growth in that fund. It's literally a cash flow play and diversification play. You're putting your capital in. We buy assets across the country. We've bought notes in probably 25 states at this point. And so the investment is diversified across geographic areas, across borrower types. And, we buy for a certain yield. We take a small management fee, and then we ideally pay the preferred return that we're aiming for to our investors.
Yeah, nice. 506C, you're able to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's accredited investors only. Just want to throw that out there.
Yes.
So yeah, so just going back to the basics a little bit, and we'll get back into the fund. Like, how do you even find these things?
How did
you get started? Great. How do you find these things?
So, that is an ongoing challenge. I'm not going to lie to you. That's one of the things that, truthfully, a passive investor who doesn't have time to develop the network to go find these assets, they're just not going to have success. They might here and there, but it takes time. It's a word of mouth industry, just like real estate itself is. And so we've built out a network of sellers, and that could be, quite honestly, I've never had luck buying directly from banks. It's really, either a larger mortgage note fund that's closing. So it might be a 3-year fund, and then they've got to liquidate. They've got to figure out how to sell off, what to do with these assets. And so that's a great opportunity to buy, is just a fund that's closing, or a note investor who's getting out of note investing, or they've had a life change or something, where they just, there's an opportunity to buy from them as well. And so there are other, I guess we buy from hedge funds, note investors, other note funds. There are also note brokers as well out there. There are also some online exchanges like PaperStack and a couple of others that you can go. And I've bought and sold on PaperStack and other exchanges as well. And you can find assets there. But at the end of the day, we have our list a list of people that we work with regularly. And I would say one thing is that doing due diligence on a note seller is just as important as due diligence on the assets that they're selling. And so it's taken some work, and it's a work in progress always. But it is the $1 million question: is where do you find these assets?
Yeah. So that's the hard part, right? That finding these assets is the hard part. Have you ever had to foreclose on any of these notes and actually acquire the property? And I guess
Yes.
a follow-up question is, do you ever look at a non-performing note like, hey, I actually want to own that property?
Mm-hmm.
So
Great
I'm gonna
questions. Yeah, great questions. To be clear, we're not trying to kick people, grandma out onto the street or anything like that. That's not our goal typically. Well, that's never our goal, but we're never trying to kick someone out of their home. But the reality is, some people honestly need a little bit of a kick in the pants, and oftentimes that's not really the best. Them staying in the house is not often the best scenario for them. I know that might sound harsh, but at the end of the day, if someone can't afford to live somewhere, sometimes these people are living in squalor and they really need a change of environment. To answer your question about, do we target the property? Yes, sometimes we do. In fact, we just closed on 2, they're called HECM loans, or reverse mortgages, where the borrowers are deceased. The property is underwater, meaning, the loan amount is greater than the property value. And it should be a quick exit through the property. So HUD will sell off these big pools of reverse mortgages. And we were able to purchase 2 of them very recently. It's a vacant property. You're not doing an eviction. Borrower is deceased. You've got to work through the heirs or foreclosure, and exit the property that way. If your listener wants to go to my website, I've got a really good, it's a Jacksonville blog post. I've got a couple of blog posts about this deal. I still hold this rental today, and it was a non-performing note that we purchased a few years ago. And I had no intention of exiting through the property or holding the property as a rental property, but running the numbers, it just was too good to let go. And so, long story, but we ended up doing a deed in lieu of foreclosure, actually, in this case, and got the property back. And now it's a long-term buy and hold property for my own rental portfolio.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense. There's always multiple ways to look at an investment, right? But it does sound, it is not something that I've executed on myself, but it sounds like this is an active business, right? And that's why you've put together an income fund for people that want to get involved passively. Because as everybody knows, there's active investments, there's passive investments. If you're going to do something active, maybe your returns are going to be a little bit better, but you're going to give up a lot of time and effort to get those returns. So if you want to go the passive side, if you're still full-time in your career, you're a full-time doctor or lawyer or whatever you are, these passive investments are the way to go, without having to know every single detail about a new business.
Yeah. And I don't know if you can see this, but I wore this specifically for this show.
There it is. There it is.
Passive income. You're absolutely right. These gurus, some of the note investing gurus out there will try to sell, notes as passive. We have another blog post that talks about just it's a spectrum. There's active and passive on either end. But at the end of the day, if you're going to, note investing in my world is very, very active. And we have a non-performing note fund that's considerably more active than the performing note fund. So you're dealing with foreclosures, bankruptcies, deed in lieu, tracking delinquent property taxes. Do I have to physically go anywhere? No, but it is not passive. But that's why we offer the passive investment for people who, like you said, have maybe more capital than time or energy, and they want to put that capital to work.
That's right. There are certain gurus out there that, whatever it is that they are pitching, they tend to always pitch it as passive, even though it is an active business, whether that's
Mailbox money.
yeah, whether that's a mortgage note, or I mean, people will pitch Airbnb short-term rentals as passive. They're like, well, you can
Right.
delegate this and you can automate that, and there's software for all these things, but you still got to put all that stuff together. You've still got to monitor all those things. You've still got to oversee all these different aspects of a business, and that's what it is. It's a business that you're running, and it's not passive. Like
No, not at all.
it's not. And it is on a spectrum. Some things are more passive than others, but when
Yeah.
you're investing in, as a passive investor into some sort of a fund or a syndication, that's really leaning really far into the passive side.
Absolutely. 100%. And I'm, as you are, Seth, I assume you are. I know you're an active investor, but I do have passive investments myself in other funds, other note funds, and my own note funds as well. And so nothing wrong with doing both, but I would say you need to be careful about, you got to make a decision at some point. Do you want to scale this thing and make this really a business, or are you satisfied with potentially a little bit lower return, and you are giving up some control, but much fewer headaches and just a lot less work.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of the listeners are high income earning professionals. So they've
Yeah,
already put a lot of time and effort into being able to earn this much money from their W-2. And
absolutely.
that's probably your best bet, to be honest with you. I've been there. I was in those shoes. You're probably better off putting your head down and like, let's grind for a few years. Let's not spend every single dollar that we make on
Yeah,
all the new stuff, on a new car every 2 years or every year, and a bigger
right.
house that you don't need. Like, let's set aside some of that and invest it passively. And then maybe one of those will stick. Maybe one of those passive investments will be a mortgage note fund where you're like, man, I kind of like this business. Like,
Yeah,
I like the sound of it. I've learned about it. And then you start
sure.
maybe progressing on the active side, and maybe that takes over, and you want to get into that as a business, as an entrepreneur. But a great way to kind of dip your toe in the water is to become a passive investor. That's the way that I did it into, multifamily syndications. I invested passively in a number of deals first and kind of learned
Yeah,
about it, learned the ropes, and I'm like, I can do this. And then that's when I made the transition.
yeah, definitely. It really comes down to what your goals are and what your situation is, for sure. I'll say I was too passive initially when I went into notes, because personally, I just don't. You were probably a little better student, Seth. Not that I was a bad student, but I invest unless I'm actively investing. I'm just not going to learn a lot. So the reality is, yeah, it's fine to learn about the asset class. You definitely should learn about the operator for sure if you're putting capital with them, but you're not going to, once you're getting your checks and your disbursements, you're not going to probably learn a whole lot about how to do that on the active side. And
Right.
so that's what we're here for.
Yeah. It's more of like a spark of an interest, right? Like, maybe if you already
Exactly.
have that spark and then you invest passively, then you're like, okay, well, now I'm invested. Like, let me learn about this. And you have to actively go out there and educate yourself and network and talk to people that are in the business.
Definitely. 100%.
All right, man. Before we jump into the Freedom 4, you have one last golden nugget for our listeners?
Oh man. I would say when it comes to investing, take the long-term view. Don't chase immediate returns. I do think it's certainly we all want to make $1 million tomorrow, but I think it's play the long game when it comes to investing. I think that's critical.
Love that, man. All right, let's jump into the Freedom 4. What's the best thing you do to keep your mind and body healthy?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I instituted this year actually is breath work, and it's it takes 10 minutes and per day for me at least. And it's been phenomenal. And it's something that, quite honestly, as a athlete back in the day, or even in the military, I would have scoffed at something like this, to be honest with you, because it's just, it's not manly or whatever. And it's like, it is phenomenal. So breath work, I mean, I do other things for sure, but that's certainly this year, it's been a game changer for me. I just feel like it resets my central nervous system, and it just gets me focused. And I know there are other physiological benefits that you can ask Dr. Andrew Huberman or somebody else about.
Cool. I'll have to look into that. I actually haven't. I mean, obviously everybody talks about it. It's a hot topic.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten into it. I haven't gotten into
Yeah.
that. Plus like the cold plunges and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I really want to explore that a little bit.
I don't know how much you can cut this out if we don't have time, but I'm just going to be open about this. I just had in late December, I got a viral infection, like a norovirus. And then I had what I think was a pretty severe panic attack, and it was super scary. And so that's why I started doing this. And somebody on my team actually sent me I guess we'll call it an implement or a tool that I use for the breath work. There's a Bluetooth connection to your phone, and it's pretty cool. So it's structured and back to that discipline, right? Yeah. But so there was a reason I started doing it, and it's so accessible. In 5 to 10 minutes a day, you can start doing it. So
yeah, very cool.
Highly recommend.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that, man. With all your success, what is one limiting belief that you've crushed along the way, and how did you get past it?
I think just being afraid to, that you have to be perfect, right? So I used to be an editor back in the day, and so many things would just not get done or not get completed within our team, our organization, because it had to be perfect. And it's like, I think as I've progressed into more of the entrepreneurial lifestyle, and it's not an option anymore. So I think just taking action has kind of overcome that limiting belief of chasing perfection.
Yeah. I can agree with you there. Done, not perfect.
Yes.
As my background as an attorney, I mean, we're paid to be perfect. Like, we can't make mistakes, especially in contracts and the way that we write things. But when you kind of make that transition over to being an entrepreneur, there's too much to do to be perfect. You just got to get it done. Good enough.
Absolutely. Good enough you have to be open, willing to accept that, for sure.
Yep. What's one actionable step our listeners can do right now to start creating more freedom?
So I'll use the military here. You can, which is where I learned kind of backwards planning, reverse planning. So literally and I'm not going to tell you I'm perfect at this, but think about create a vivid vision for your life in the next 3 to 5 years. Pick 3 years out from today, and what do you want your life to look like? And then backwards plan. And now I'm not saying you need to plan every minute of every day, but you can that will increase the urgency, sense of urgency in your life, and the intentionality of every hour and every day, because you realize this is doable, but I got to take ownership of my current situation if I want this to be the reality in 3 years. So I would say create a vivid vision and kind of reverse or backwards plan to get there.
Perfect. Last but not least, how has passive income made your life better?
Yeah, I mean, I think in multiple ways, but a big one that stands out is giving me, I guess we'll call it margin, to take some more risks on the entrepreneurial side. And because I do have alternative sources of income, passive income, it's allowed me that kind of mental and financial bandwidth or margin to maybe invest in a company that, even if it doesn't go perfectly or doesn't go well, it's not profitable, that's okay. I still have that cushion for me and my family. So it's been a huge factor in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Game changer, man. It just changes your mindset, changes your life in so many ways. Jamie, this has been incredible, dude. You've got so much great content to share in your brain, man. You got to get it out there. I know you've got an awesome podcast that I was on, Adversity to
Yeah.
Abundance. Everybody
Yeah.
should check that out. Other than that, Jamie, where else can people find out more about you?
Yeah, just two things I'll mention very quickly. Literally got my book delivered today, like an hour before I hopped on here. It's From Adversity to Abundance. It is based on the podcast. So I encourage you, listener, to check that out. From Adversity to Abundance is the book that's out. And then labradorlending.com, LABRADOR.com is where you can check us out.
All right, man. Awesome. I'll drop all that in the show notes. Thanks again for coming on, brother.
Thanks for having me, Seth. This has been great.